Archival note. The following text is a compilation of digital logs, voice recorder transcripts, and recovered security footage regarding the Kiruna mine incident of December 2024. File status: classified, academic review only. Subject: the disappearance of Deep Section 7 crew. December 15th, 2024, 6:30 in the morning. My name is Peter Storm. I am the operations manager for the Kiruna Extension Project, tasked with overseeing stability testing in the Precambrian shield rock, 2 kilometers, that's about 1.25 miles, beneath the surface of Sweden. Mining is not about discovery, but about management. Managing logistics, managing geology, and mostly managing gravity. When you are that deep, the earth wants to close the hole you have made. It is a constant crushing pressure that we hold back with hydraulics and concrete. The Precambrian shield is old rock, 2 billion years old, if you can imagine that. It formed when the continents were still assembling, when the surface of the planet was a different thing entirely. That age makes it hard, crystalline, refusing to bend or compress like younger rock. When you drill into shield rock and it decides it has had enough, it does not collapse, it explodes. We call them rock bursts. The stress builds silently in the stone until a single drill impact triggers a catastrophic release. I have seen a rock burst shatter a 12-ton drill rig into fragments no larger than your fist. The rock does not warn you, does not creak or groan. It simply waits, and then shatters like glass. That is why we go slow. That is why we monitor the seismic sensors every hour. That is why I trust men like Stig, who has been reading rock longer than I have been alive, and who can feel the stress in a tunnel wall just by resting his palm against it. The morning of the 15th began like every other morning for the last 3 years, with coffee that tasted of iron because we could never filter the mineral content out of the tap water entirely, and I sat at the aluminum table watching the steam rise while listening to the wind howl across the tundra outside the prefab walls. Stig Larsson walked in first, our foreman, a man carved out of the very granite we drilled into at 58 years old with hands that looked like leather gloves even when they were bare, and he poured a cup of coffee before nodding at me. He said, "Cold one?" I replied, "It's December, Stig." "It's supposed to be cold." He said, "Not down there. The rock is warm today." He said it the way other men talked about weather in their bones, an instinct. The rest of the Deep Section 7 crew filtered in. Anders and Maya, the drill operators, younger, cynical, highly competent. Anders had a nervous habit of cracking his knuckles before every shift. Maya never looked you in the eye when she spoke, but could thread a drill bit through a gap the width of your thumb. Anders dropped into the chair across from me and cracked his knuckles one by one. He said, "Another day in the hole. You read the latest safety memo from Stockholm? They want us to fill out incident reports in triplicate now, as if we have time to file paperwork every time a bolt shears." I said, "Just do the reports." Anders said, "Sure." Right after I explained to the actuaries why a 2-kilometer drill shaft is a workplace hazard. He grinned, but it did not reach his eyes. Anders had been doing this for 6 years. He knew exactly how many ways the rock could kill him. Maya sat next to him in silence, pulling a small steel bolt from her pocket to set it on the table, touching it 3 times with her index finger before putting it back. She did this every morning, and I had never asked her why. Thomas Hedlund was the last to arrive, a geotechnical engineer sent from Stockholm to monitor the new seam, and he looked tired after only 2 weeks on site with the cold wearing on him. He was not a mine man, but a university man, and he wore his helmet like it was a costume. Thomas said, "Morning." He poured coffee and stood near the window looking out at the darkness. "Does the sun come up at all this time of year?" Stig said, "Not until January." Thomas nodded. He looked uneasy. "Those density readings from yesterday, they're bothering me." "Bothering you how?" I asked. Thomas said, "The echo pattern. We're drilling through solid granite. The seismic return should be uniform. but the readings show a void space, a hollow, and gas pockets don't create echo patterns like this. I've reviewed the data 6 times. It's as if there's negative mass down there. Stig said, "Could be a fossil seam. Happens sometimes." Tomas shook his head slowly. The 2 maintenance techs, Victor and Lars, arrived together as brothers, though you wouldn't know it from looking at them, with Victor tall and silent while Lars was short and constantly humming under his breath, and Victor nodded at me before filling 2 thermoses with coffee. They were a good crew, quiet and professional, the kind of people who preferred the silence of the deep earth to the noise of the surface world. At 7:15 in the morning, I walked them to the collar, that massive concrete ring that frames the mine shaft where the service elevator waited, a double-deck steel cage suspended by a cable thick as a man's arm. "Standard protocol today," I told them, shouting over the hum of the winch. "Thomas needs density scans of the new drift at 2.1 kilometers. Do not push the drill if the vibration sensors spike. We're deep enough that the rock behaves like glass if you hit it wrong." Stig adjusted his helmet, confident. He said, "We know the rock, Peter. We'll be gentle." Maya stepped to the elevator and rested her palm against the steel frame for 3 seconds in the same ritual she performed every shift before stepping inside, and the others filed in behind her with Victor and Lars standing in the back corner, Thomas clutching his tablet to his chest before the heavy mesh gate rattled shut. "Comm check," I said into my radio. "Clear signal," Stig's voice crackled back. "Warm down here, humidity rising, dropping now." I watched the cable play out as the cage dropped at 12 meters per second, and I could see their faces through the mesh for the first 3 seconds. Stig looking straight ahead, Maya staring at her boots, Tomas gripping the rail. Then the darkness swallowed them and the cage vanished into the black throat of the world. I stood at the edge of the shaft and listened to the mechanical whine of the rollers echoing up from below, the air that smelled of grease and dust and sulfur, the smell of the earth itself. I stood there until the mechanical whine faded, replaced by the silence of the snow outside. I returned to my office. The day was aggressive in its boredom. The office was a prefab module bolted to the operations building, containing 1 window, a metal desk, and 3 monitors showing seismic data, elevator status, and environmental readouts from the deep sections. I sat down to find the seismic monitor displaying a flat line with no vibration or stress events, while the elevator status screen showed the cage parked at minus 2,100 meters with environmental readings all normal. We were 3 weeks behind schedule, and the board was asking questions I did not have good answers for. At 12 noon, I radioed down for a status check using the hardline relay system, a cable-based communication that ran the length of the shaft because personal radios couldn't penetrate 2 kilometers of rock. I called over the radio. "Topside to Section 7. Status?" "Static." Then Stig's voice, slightly distorted by the depth. "Drilling proceeds. We've hit a density change. Tomas is excited, says the readings are unusual." "Unusual how?" Stig said. "Hollow. The echo is wrong, but the rock is stable. We're pushing through." "Copy. Check in at 4 in the afternoon for extraction." "Copy." The line went dead. The monitors showed normal. Seismic flat, oxygen stable. I went back to the spreadsheets. That was the last time I spoke to them. At 4 in the afternoon, the shift ended. Polar night had fallen. The wind rattled the windows. I waited for the call. 18 minutes for the cage to ascend from that depth. 4:20 in the afternoon. The cage hadn't moved. The weight sensor still showed the cage parked at minus 2,100 meters. The status indicator was green. No alarms. 4:45 in the afternoon. I tried the radio. "Topside to Section 7. Respond. Static. Section 7, this is Peter. Acknowledge. Static. 5 in the afternoon." I walked to the hoist control room. The operator, a young kid named Henrik, looked nervous. He was staring at the control panel like it had personally betrayed him. Henrik said, "I'm getting nothing, boss." "I tried the emergency line. It's dead." And the cage, the sensors say it's parked at the bottom, but the weight load is off. Off how? It's too light, like it's empty. The weight sensor showed 920 kilograms. Too light. The cage alone weighed 850. The math was wrong. I said, "Keep trying. I'm going down. You want me to drop the auxiliary cage?" "No," I said, a knot forming in my stomach. "If the main cage is acting up, I don't trust the power grid down there. I'll take the service lift to the substation at -2000. It was an annoyance. That's all I thought it was. A mechanical failure that was going to cost me hours of paperwork. Helmet, heavy lamp, gas meter. I grabbed them all. I stepped into the service lift and pulled the gate shut. The descent was claustrophobic. The cage was smaller than the main elevator, barely room for 2 men, meant for equipment repair. I was alone. The cage itself is older than the main elevator, with mesh walls rusted at the corners and a floor plate that has a crack running through it that I've been meaning to fix for 2 years. And when the winch engages, the whole thing shudders, so you feel every meter of cable paying out above you. The drop takes time, and you lose sense of the surface quickly. For the first 100 meters, you can still see the circle of gray sky above you shrinking, but then it's gone and you are in the throat of the earth. The air pressure changes. My ears popped at -500 meters, popped again at -800. The heat rises with depth from geothermal gradient. By the time I hit -1000 meters, I had unzipped my parka as warm, humid air stuck to my skin. At -1500 meters, the darkness was absolute, and my headlamp cut a narrow cone through the void, revealing flashes of wet rock, rusted support bolts, and guide rails streaked with grease as the cage shook and the cable sang with a high-pitched whine that filled the shaft. I focused on breathing. At -1900 meters, I keyed the radio. "Henrik, how are we looking?" Static, then his voice, thin and distant. "Still nothing from the crew, Peter, but I'm picking up weird feedback on the seismic sensors. Not vibration, just pressure." "Pressure from what?" "I don't know. It's like the rock is settling, but it's not moving. The sensors show increased pressure on the support columns." "Copy. Approaching substation." At -2000 meters, 100 meters above the bottom, the cage lurched violently. It wasn't a mechanical stutter. It was a hard stop. The emergency brakes slammed into the guide rails with a screech that tore at my eardrums. I was thrown against the mesh wall. My shoulder hit the steel. My teeth rattled together. The lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by the dim red glow of the emergency backups. The cage swayed and I grabbed the support rail to steady myself, my heart hammering while the silence after the screech became deafening. "Henrik!" I shouted into the radio. "Status!" Static, then faintly breaking up. "Brake engaged. Manual override fails. You stuck?" "I'm stuck. Brakes locked. I'm going to inspect." Sweat beaded on my forehead, ran down my back. The red emergency light cast everything in a sickly glow. The shaft stretched above me into darkness. Below me, the last 100 meters to the drift level. I stared at the pressure gauge. 0, a blown seal. A freak mechanical failure 2 kilometers beneath the crust. Just my damn luck. It figured. The board was already breathing down my neck about the timeline, and now I was going to lose hours climbing a ladder because a $10 seal gave up the ghost. I didn't feel fear yet, just exhaustion. I leaned out, my headlamp cutting a thin cone through the darkness. The maintenance ladder wasn't close. It was bolted to the far rock wall, separated from the cage by the black throat of the shaft. To reach it, I had to cross the support struts, thick steel I-beams that spanned the width of the shaft like the ribs of a skeleton. I looked up. Darkness. I looked down. Darkness. Great. Just great. You might wonder why I didn't just climb up. That's the thing about deep earth mining. There is no ladder to the surface. You don't climb 2 kilometers of vertical rock. It's physically impossible. The only way in or out of the world is the cage. This ladder? It was just a local link, a short 100-meter umbilical cord connecting the substation level to the drift bottom. That realization hit me harder than the heat. If the main cage was broken and this service lift was dead, there was literally no way up or down anymore. I was on my own until I met up with the crew down at Deep Section 7. Me and Stig could formulate a plan. I stepped out of the cage and onto the first beam. The steel was slick with condensation. My boot slid a fraction of an inch, and my stomach dropped. I froze. I crouched down, gripping the cold, greasy flange of the beam with both hands. I moved inch by inch. My breathing sounded deafening in the dead air. Left hand, right hand, slide my feet. The beam vibrated slightly under my weight. It felt fragile, suspended over that infinite drop. I refused to look down. I just stared at the rust spots on the metal, focusing on the texture, the smell of the grease, anything to keep my mind off the void below. It took me 5 minutes to cross 3 meters. When my hand finally touched the cold, rough iron of the ladder, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I grabbed the rung. It felt solid, real. I swung my weight onto it, leaving the beam behind. Now there was only one way to go. I started the climb down. A vertical drop of 100 meters to the drift level, in the dark, in the heat. I began to climb. Clang, step, clang, step. The rungs were hot to the touch as the rock radiated heat, and my gloves became soaked with sweat, while my breathing sounded loud in my ears as I counted the rungs, 10, 20, 30, before I stopped counting, because my arms were burning. The silence began to assert itself, because mines are noisy places where ventilation fans scream and pumps thump rhythmically and water drips and the earth itself groans as it settles under its own weight. But here, there was nothing. The ventilation was off. The pumps were silent. It was a dead zone. The only sound was my breathing and the clang of my boots on the rungs. At minus 20-50 meters, the sweat was stinging my eyes. The heat down here was oppressive. The air felt thick, resistant, as if I were inhaling syrup. My lungs burned, my arms ached. I had climbed 50 meters, 50 more to go. I stopped to catch my breath. I hung there on the ladder, 2 kilometers of rock above me, listening. And I heard it, a scream. It came from below, sharp, piercing, high-pitched. I froze, my hands locked on the rungs. It sounded like metal shearing under stress, or a drill bit shattering against stone. It was a scream that was cut short, snapped off as if a hand had been clamped over a mouth, or as if whoever was screaming had simply run out of air. "Stig!" I yelled. The words came out wrong, deadened by the heavy air. "Stig!" Nothing. "Maya! Anders!" I shouted. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Thicker, like the air itself was swallowing the sound. I tried to move faster, to climb down quickly, but my arms were burning and my hands kept slipping on the hot rungs, and the more I tried to hurry, the more my body refused to cooperate. Each rung felt like it took minutes to reach. The scream echoed in my memory, but it felt distant now, like it had happened hours ago, and I started to doubt I'd heard it at all. Maybe it was just the metal, maybe it was my imagination, maybe there was no scream. 50 meters, 40, 30. My breathing was ragged, my vision blurred. The heat pressed down on me. Finally, I hit the bottom level. Section 7 drift. I stumbled, caught myself, breathing hard. My light cut a frantic arc through the gloom. "Hello," I screamed. My voice echoed down the tunnel and died. Nothing. I was standing at the junction of the main tunnel with the shaft access to my left and the main drift stretching 400 meters to the drill site on my right, where emergency lights cast dim yellow illumination and threw long skeletal shadows against the rough-hewn walls, while the air remained perfectly still with no movement or sound. Gas meter read safe. Oxygen normal, no toxins. But it felt wrong. It felt old, like I was breathing air that had been sealed in a tomb. The main tunnel stretches for 400 meters before hitting the active drill face. To my right was the operations room, a reinforced bunker carved into the rock, used for breaks, data analysis, and emergency shelter. I checked the ops room first. The heavy steel door was propped open with a boot. Stig's boot, size 11, steel-toed, scuffed on the heel. I stepped inside. Stig, Tomas? The room was empty but not abandoned. Everything was organized. That's the only word for it. In a mining crisis, a collapse, a leak, there is chaos. Chairs overturned, coffee spilled, gear dropped where people ran. This room was terrifyingly neat. On the central table, the crew's logbooks were stacked in a perfect pyramid of 6 books with each spine aligned, and the pens were arranged in a row parallel to the edge of the desk with spacing identical between each one. 6 coffee mugs sat in a circle on the counter, all full, all cold. The liquid had a film on top. They had been sitting since before the breakthrough. 4 hours, maybe 5. But they were arranged in a perfect circle. One chair, Stig's heavy reinforced swivel chair, was knocked over, the only sign of disorder. It lay on its side, the hydraulic cylinder exposed. The control panel on the far wall was active. This was the nerve center for the section, monitoring air, power, and security feeds. The monitors glowed in the dim light. Grainy black and white feeds from the CCTV cameras mounted throughout the tunnels. I scanned them. Camera 1, showing the main tunnel, empty. Camera 3, showing storage, empty. Camera 4, showing the aux shaft, empty. And then Camera 2, showing the drill face, and I froze. There they were, all 6 of them. Stig, Maya, Anders, Thomas, Victor, Lars. They were standing in the main excavation chamber about 300 meters from my position. They were arranged in a loose semicircle. They weren't moving. They weren't working. They were just standing there. I leaned closer to the screen. The resolution was poor, security camera quality, but I could see the drill rig. It was pulled back, silent. Behind it, in the rock face, was a hole, a jagged, dark opening about 2 meters wide. They had broken through, and on the ground, between the crew and the hole, was an object. It looked like a rock, but too symmetrical, a dark, seated shape. I grabbed the microphone for the PA system. It was wired to speakers throughout the drift. I pressed the button. My hand was shaking. Stig, this is Peter. My voice boomed through the speakers. The audio distortion lines rippled across the monitor. The sound down there must have been deafening. I am in the ops room. Stay where you are. I am coming to you. Nothing. Not a flinch. Stig didn't turn his head. Maya didn't look up. They stood like statues, indifferent to the voice booming from the ceiling. Can you hear me? Acknowledge. Still nothing. They were ignoring me. I released the button. The quiet rushed back in, heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I needed to know what was happening before I walked into that room. I checked the environmental logs on the computer. Atmospheric analysis, drill site oxygen, 20.8%. Normal. Toxins, none detected. Particulates, low. They weren't hallucinating from gas, so I checked the thermal logs. The thermal logs showed the drill site cooling steadily since the breakthrough. That shouldn't be possible down here. 'Cause down here, surrounded by insulated rock, temperature is constant. Physics demands it. Geothermal heat radiates from the earth and it does not cool unless something is drawing the heat away. Yet the drill site was cooling. Something was sucking the heat out of the air. I couldn't just walk down the main tunnel. I looked at the schematic on the wall. The maintenance tunnel. It ran parallel to the main drift, a narrow service crawl space for the ventilation ducts. It popped out behind the equipment storage cages, just 10 meters from the drill face. I could get close. I grabbed a pry bar from the tool rack. It felt heavy and reassuring in my hand. "Henrik," I whispered into my radio, knowing he probably couldn't hear me through the rock. "I'm going in. Standard protocol is suspended." I slipped out of the ops room and pried open the grate to the maintenance tunnel. It was tight, maybe a meter high. I had to crouch walk. The heat was worse in here. The ventilation ducts ran along the ceiling and they were still radiating warmth even though the fans were off. The pipes were hot to the touch. I turned off my headlamp to avoid casting light ahead of me. I moved in the dark, guiding myself by the touch of the wall. The tunnel was narrow. My shoulders brushed both walls. The concrete was rough, unfinished. The air was thick, humid, sticking to my skin like oil. I counted my steps. 100. 200. Something was different here. The quiet wasn't empty, but occupied. The air pressure pressed against my eardrums, a rhythmic throbbing. Thump, 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 thump. I stopped. Was that my heartbeat? I kept moving. The crawl space narrowed. I had to turn sideways. My chest scraped against the wall. My back pressed against the opposite side. I inched forward. The heat was unbearable now. The narrow space and the hot ventilation ducts created an oven effect. Sweat poured down my face. My breathing sounded ragged, desperate. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I reached the end of the tunnel. The service grate looked out into the equipment storage area. Beyond that, the open drill site. I peered through the mesh. The emergency floodlights washed the site in a sickly yellow glare. They were closer than on the camera, maybe 15 meters away. From this angle, I could see the full formation. They were standing in a circle, facing inward. And in the center of the circle was the object. It was a statue, black and made of a stone that seemed to absorb the floodlight rather than reflect it. It was roughly the size of a child. Its arms were wrapped around its knees. Its face was smooth, featureless, except for two deep, vertical slits where eyes should be. And the crew. I strained to listen. I heard nothing, but their mouths were moving. Stig's jaw was working rhythmically. Maya's lips were forming shapes, rapid and precise. Anders was nodding, his tongue darting out to wet his cracked lips, then resuming the silent speech. They were screaming whispers into the air, but no sound was coming out. The scene violated the basic rules of human behavior. I needed to document this. I pulled my digital voice recorder from my pocket. It's a standard-issue Sony device, battered from years of fieldwork. I pressed record. The tiny red LED blinked to life. I whispered into the mic. Time is 7:48 at night. I am at the maintenance grate. Crew is visible. They are unresponsive, engaging in some kind of ritual behavior. No sound. I am going to try to make contact. I put the recorder in my breast pocket, lens facing out. I pushed the grate open. It squealed on its hinges, a rusted metal shriek. I flinched and waited for them to turn, but they didn't, and the sound echoed and died, swallowed by the silence. I stepped out into the storage bay. I walked past the racks of drill bits. I stepped into the yellow light of the drift. I was 5 meters from them. I said, "Stig." My voice shook. No reaction. "Maya, it's Peter. Look at me." Nothing. They continued their silent communion with the black stone thing. I walked closer, 3 meters now, close enough to see the sweat on their necks and the tremors in their hands as they looked exhausted and depleted, like marathon runners at the limit of endurance. The statue up close seemed to vibrate, not physically but visually. The edges blurred as if the light couldn't quite find purchase on its surface. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision. I should grab Maya, I should shake her, but the air around them felt heavy, charged with static. My watch showed the time of contact, 8:17 at night. I blinked. I shook my wrist. That couldn't be right. I had turned on the recorder at 7:48 at night. I had walked 10 meters. It should be 7:50 at night, maybe 7:51 at night. Where did 29 minutes go? I backed away. My legs felt numb, heavy, like I had been standing for a long time. My jaw ached. A dull, throbbing pain in my hinge joints. I touched my mouth. My lips were dry, cracked. Had I been doing it too? Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in my brain. I turned and ran. I didn't care about the noise anymore. I sprinted back to the maintenance grate, scrambled through the tunnel, bruising my knees on the rock, and burst back into the ops room. I slammed the door and locked it. I collapsed into the chair, gasping for air. The hardline radio crackled. "Peter? Peter, respond. You've been dark for 40 minutes. What's happening down there?" "Henrik, the surface, the real world." The hardline relay still worked, even if my personal radio was dead. "Stand by," I managed. I barely recognized the sound. "Reviewing evidence." "Evidence of what?" I didn't answer. I couldn't explain. Not yet. The recorder. I ripped it from my pocket. It was still running. Timer. 34 minutes and 12 seconds. 34 minutes of audio, though I had been conscious for maybe 5 of them. My hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the cable. I plugged the recorder into the terminal. I pulled up the audio analysis software. I put on the headphones. I pressed play, 0 to 2.5 minutes. My footsteps, my whisper. Time is 7:48 at night. The squeal of the grate. My voice calling Stig, 2:30 to 30 minutes. The waveform went crazy. It wasn't silence, but a cacophony. Through the headphones, I heard voices, whispering, overlapping. It sounded like a choir of the insane, but the words were backwards. The cadence was reversed. It sounded like sucking air in rather than pushing it out. This, latent, is, but reversed, inhaled, wrong. And rising above the mix, louder than the others, was a voice I recognized. My voice. Nausea rose in my throat. I had been speaking. For 27 minutes. I highlighted the track section where my voice was dominant. I selected Effects, Reverse. I pressed play. My own voice, calm, flat, terrifyingly rational, filled the ops room. "It says the air is too thick here. We are swimming in molasses. The pressure of the atmosphere crushes the thought before it can leave the mouth." I stopped the playback. My hand was shaking over the keyboard. I didn't want to hear more. I didn't want to know what else I had said. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the waveform, listening to nothing. I pressed play again. "It says we are digging in the wrong direction. We dig through space, moving rock. We should be digging through the quiet. That is where the ore is. It says the statue is not a statue. It is a damper. It absorbs the noise of biology. The heartbeat is a drum that never stops. It gives us a headache. We need to stop the drum." I paused it again. Bile rose in my throat. The voice was mine, but the words weren't. The phrasing was wrong. The cadence was wrong. It sounded like me reading from a script I hadn't written. I forced myself to continue. "It says there are others, in the seams, waiting for the silence to be total. It says I am a good receiver. I have a strong signal. I should bring the others down. The surface is too loud. They are deaf up there. It says I should go back. I left too early." I ripped the headphones off. I threw them across the room. I sat there staring at the waveform. My reflection in the dark monitor looked pale, gaunt. The security feed showed them still there. I had to leave. Now. I forced myself to stand. I turned away from the screen. The hallway stretched ahead. The ladder was to the left, 50 meters, 100 meters of climbing after that. Then the brake repair, then the surface. I stepped into the hallway and turned left, 10 meters, 20. I could see the bottom rung of the ladder now, the steel gleaming dully in the emergency lighting. 30 meters. I stopped walking. I didn't mean to stop. I meant to keep going. But my feet had simply stopped obeying. Not frozen, not paralyzed, just uninterested in continuing. I stood there in the tunnel, staring at the ladder, and I thought, Why am I climbing? 100 meters. Vertical. In 36-degree heat. My arms were already exhausted from the descent. My hands were raw. The rungs would be hot enough to blister skin. And then what? The brake repair would take an hour, maybe 2. All that effort, all that pain. And at the end of it, what? The surface? The phone calls, the reports, the investigations, the questions I couldn't answer? I thought about Henrik, waiting at the hoist control panel. Young, nervous, expecting me to fix this, to come back with answers, to be the manager who solved problems. I thought about the board in Stockholm, the lawyers, the families, the media, every one of them wanting something from me, wanting explanations. I thought about my apartment, empty, cold, the milk expired, the dust thick. 3 years of living there and I'd never hung a picture. What was I going back to? I'd taken 10 steps backward without noticing. And then I realized, oh God, it's taking me too. The thought cut through the fog like a knife, sharp, cold, clarifying. This was what happened to them. Stig, Maya, Anders, all of them. They'd stood at the drill face and felt this exact thing. The reasons to resist draining away like water through a sieve. The exhaustion of continuation becoming unbearable. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from fear, from the effort of holding on to myself. I could feel it now. Not a presence, not a voice, just an absence. A hollow growing inside me where my will used to be. Every reason I had to climb that ladder, survival, duty, fear, instinct, was evaporating. Not being taken, just leaving. Like heat bleeding out into cold space. Tried to force my legs to obey. They didn't. Not because they wouldn't, because I didn't want them to. That was worse. The wanting was gone. No, I said out loud. My voice sounded flat. No, I have to... But I didn't finish the sentence, because I couldn't remember what I had to do, or why it mattered. The drill site was the other direction, 300 meters down the main tunnel. I could see the yellow glow of the floodlights reflecting off the rough walls. I shouldn't go there. I knew that. The rational part of my brain, the part that had managed logistics and geology and gravity for 3 years, was screaming at me to turn around, to climb, to get out. But that part was getting quieter, and beneath it, rising like water filling a hull, was a simple question. Why resist? They were down there. Stig, Maya, Anders. All of them. They'd found something. They'd stopped struggling. They looked peaceful. More peaceful than I'd seen anyone look in years. The exhaustion wasn't new. I'd been tired for a decade. Tired of phone calls, tired of schedules, tired of pretending I cared about the things I was supposed to care about. Tired of being Peter Storm, operations manager, competent professional, functional adult. I took a step toward the drill site, then another. The ladder disappeared behind me as I walked down the main tunnel. I passed the ops room, past the maintenance crawlspace entrance, past the last junction where I could have turned back. I was choosing this. That was the worst part. I was choosing this. Somewhere, distantly, I could hear Henrik's voice crackling over the hardline radio, tinny and desperate. Peter, respond. You've been dark for over an hour. Talk to me. I didn't respond. Barely audible through the static. Peter, if you can hear me, rescue is coming. Just hold on. We're coming for you. I looked at the radio on my belt. I could reach for it. I could press the button. I could say, don't come down here. Seal the mine. Bury it. But I didn't. My hand stayed at my side. The tunnel opened up ahead of me. The drill site, the floodlights, the circle of figures still standing, still facing inward. And in the center, the statue, waiting. I stopped at the threshold. This was the last moment. If I walked into that chamber, I wouldn't walk out. I knew that. I stood there for what felt like hours, Maybe it was seconds. Time wasn't working right anymore. Then Stig turned his head, slowly. His face was calm, empty. He looked at me the way you'd look at someone who was late to a meeting, patient, knowing they'd arrive eventually. He gestured to the gap in the circle, the space between him and Maya. They'd left room for me. They'd been waiting. I stepped inside. It's wonderful down here. It's finally quiet. Recording ends. Epilogue. The Karuna Mystery. Transcript. SVT News. Broadcast. December 22nd, 2024. 1 week later. Anchor. We are going live now to Karuna, where an unprecedented rescue operation is reaching its climax. 7 days ago, 8 miners vanished into the depths of Section 7. Today, rescue teams have finally breached the elevator shaft. Our correspondent, Lisa Anderson, is on the scene. Reporter. Thank you, Johan. The mood here is tense. Families have been gathering at the gates for days. The rescue team, led by veteran safety officer Einar Winter, went down an hour ago. We have just established a link to their helmet cameras. The image is grainy, shaking with the movement of the rescue climber. Einar. Command. We are breaching the drift level. Oxygen is good. No toxins. Command. Copy. Proceed to Ops room. The camera moves through the tunnel. The lights are still on. Einar. Ops room is empty. Equipment is running. It looks very tidy. Too tidy. Command. Check the drill site. That was the last known location. The team moves down the tunnel. The camera pans to the drill site. The floodlights are on. Einar. Command. I have visual on the site. Command. Status of the crew? Einar stops walking as the camera focuses on the excavation zone where the equipment is there, and the helmets are lined up on a bench in a perfectly straight row with each one facing the same direction. But the site is empty. Einar. They're gone. Command. Gone. There's nowhere to go. Check the cavity. Einar walks to the jagged hole in the rock face and shines his high-powered light into it, and the beam cuts through the darkness to reveal a small, circular chamber that is completely empty. Einar. There's nobody here. No bodies, no footprints, no drag marks. Just gone. Command. What about the equipment, personal effects? Einar. Everything is here. Radios, tools, water bottles, all arranged. Command. Explain. Einar. There's a statue, black stone, in the center of the drift. It's just sitting there. The camera tilts down. The black stone statue sits there, cold, indifferent, just a rock. Einar. It's cold. The rock is cold. Shouldn't be cold down here. Command. Noted. Keep searching. Einar. Wait, there's something on the ground. Einar kneels and the camera angle shifts to show a digital voice recorder with its red LED still blinking. Einar. I've got a recorder. It's still running. Battery should be dead by now. Command. Secure it. Do not play it. Bag it as evidence. Einar. Copy. Bagging now. The camera shows Einar placing the recorder in an evidence bag before standing and looking around the empty site. Einar. Command. There's nowhere they could have gone. The elevator was sabotaged. The ventilation shafts are too narrow. We're 2 kilometers down. They just vanished. Command. Understood. Return to surface. We're sealing the site. Feed ends. BBC World Service. December 24. The new Dyatlov Pass. Host. It is being called the greatest mystery of the modern era. Miners vanished from a sealed chamber 2 kilometers underground. And a baffled scientific community. Guest, Dr. Eris Thorne, geologist. The physics don't work. We have seismic data confirming no collapse, no rock fall, no tunnel breach. We have security footage showing them in position at 7 at night, but when the rescue team reviewed the archived recordings, they found a 15-minute corruption window starting at 7:15, and when the footage returns at 7:30, the room is empty. 8 people cannot simply cease to exist. It is as if they stepped sideways out of reality. Host. And the recording found at the scene? Guest. Classified. The Swedish authorities will not release it, but I have spoken to people who heard it, and they say the voice is calm and rational, describing the experience as peaceful. Host. And the artifact? The statue? Guest. Classified. The Swedish government has sealed the mine. They poured concrete, thousands of tons of it. They filled every tunnel, every shaft, every access point. They aren't trying to keep people out. They are trying to keep something in. Big thanks for spending your night here. If you're looking for more chills, hit that subscribe button and welcome to the Nocturnal Crew. Drop your thoughts in the comments and what you'd like to hear more of, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.